The year I turned 16, my parents bought a first-class ticket to Paris for my younger sister, a brand new BMW for my older brother, and for me, they bought a padlock for the pantry door. That isn't a metaphor. It isn't poetic license used to garner sympathy. It is simply the cold, hard inventory of my life as Elara Vance. If you were to look at the family portraits hanging in our hallway, you would see a masterpiece of suburban perfection. My father, Richard, with his winning smile and real estate empire. My mother, Catherine, who treated social climbing like an Olympic sport. My brother, Julian, the star quarterback, and my sister, Sophie, the porcelain doll who could do no wrong. And then there was me, the ghost in the background, the mistake they forgot to erase. I remember the day the world split open perfectly. It was a Tuesday, the kind of humid, sticky July afternoon where the air feels heavy enough to choke on. I had come home from school, walking, of course, because giving me a ride would have inconvenienced the family schedule, to find suitcases lined up by the door like soldiers, Louis Vuitton, Prada, leather so expensive it smelled like a tax bracket I wasn't allowed to touch. Sophie was twirling in the living room, holding up a beret. "Do I look French?" she squealed. My mother clapped her hands, her eyes crinkling with a delight she never directed at me. "You look like a movie star, darling. Paris won't know what hit it." I stood in the entryway, my backpack digging into my shoulders, waiting for someone to acknowledge I existed. It took 3 minutes. Finally, my father looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to his usual mask of indifference. "Elara, you're home early." "It's 4 o'clock, I said, my voice sounding rusty to my own ears. "School ends at 3. "Right," he muttered, already looking back at his screen. "Well, don't just stand there blocking the flow. We have a car coming in 20 minutes. "A car?" I asked, my stomach doing a slow, painful flip. "Where are we going?" The room went silent, not a peaceful silence, but the kind of sharp, sudden quiet that happens when someone drops a glass on a tile floor. My mother stopped folding a silk scarf, Julian stopped texting, Sophie stopped twirling. They exchanged a look, a collective, silent communication that I had seen 1,000 times before. It was the look of a conspiracy. "We," my mother said, emphasizing the word as if I were a dull child, "are going to Paris for the summer. It's a celebration for Julian's graduation and Sophie's, well, just for being Sophie." "And me?" The question hung there, pathetic and small. My mother sighed, the sound of a woman deeply burdened by a problem she wished would just disappear. "Elara, be realistic. Tickets were astronomical, and with your grades slipping in math, we decided a summer of quiet study would be best for you. You need focus, not distractions." My grades were slipping because I was doing Julian's homework every night so he could stay on the team, but saying that out loud was a crime punishable by total exile. "So, I'm staying here?" I asked. "Alone? For 2 months?" "Don't be dramatic," my father snapped. "There's plenty of food in the freezer, the bills are paid. Just try not to burn the house down. And for God's sake, keep the blinds closed. I don't want the neighbors thinking we left the place unattended." That was it. That was the goodbye. 20 minutes later, I watched from the window as the black town car pulled away. Sophie waved at the house, not at me, but at her reflection in the glass. I watched until the taillights disappeared, swallowed by the heat haze of the suburbs. I turned back to the empty house, the silence rushing in to fill the space where their noise used to be. I walked to the kitchen, my stomach rumbling, and reached for the pantry handle. Locked. A shiny silver padlock glinted under the kitchen lights. I checked the fridge, a half-empty carton of milk, a jar of pickles, and a note in my mother's elegant, looping script. "Freezer has TV dinners. Ration them. We'll see you in August." They hadn't just left me. They had secured their assets. I was an asset they had depreciated to 0. The first week was a blur of denial. I ate the frozen meals, 1 a day, just like a good soldier. I went to the library. I slept. But by the second week, the air conditioning unit groaned and died. The house turned into an oven. I called my father, straight to voicemail. I called my mother, voicemail. I texted Julian, Read at 4:12 p.m. No reply. By the third week, the food ran out. I had miscalculated. Or maybe they had. I stared at the empty freezer, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the world. I had $3.40 in my pocket. I began to walk. I walked to the grocery store 3 miles away and bought a loaf of bread and a jar of generic peanut butter. I made it last 6 days. Hunger is a strange thing. It doesn't just hurt your stomach, it changes your mind. It sharpens you. It strips away the softness, the hope, the childish belief that things will work out. When you are hungry, you realize that love is not unconditional. Survival is the only condition. On the night of my 17th birthday, the power went out. My parents must have forgotten to pay the electric bill, or maybe they just didn't care. The house plunged into darkness. I sat on the kitchen floor, eating a spoonful of peanut butter by the light of a dying flashlight, and I made a wish. I didn't wish for them to come back. I didn't wish for a pony or a party. I wished for power. Not electricity. I wished for the kind of power that would make sure I never, ever felt this small again. And then, the doorbell rang. It was 11 p.m. in a thunderstorm. No one visits at 11 p.m. Fear, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I grabbed a heavy frying pan, the only weapon I had, and crept to the door. The bell rang again. Impatient, authoritative. I peered through the peephole. A silhouette stood there, framed by the lightning. A man, tall, leaning on a cane, wearing a trench coat that looked like it cost more than my life. Behind him, a sleek silver Rolls-Royce idled in the driveway, rain sluicing off its hood. I opened the door a crack, the chain still on. "Who are you?" The man looked down at me. He was old, perhaps in his 70s, but his face was carved from granite. Deep lines, steel-gray eyes that missed nothing, and a mouth set in a permanent line of judgment. He didn't look like a predator. He looked like a king who had lost his kingdom and was looking for a fight. "Elara Vance," he said. His voice was gravel and expensive whiskey. "You look like hell." "Who are you?" I repeated, gripping the frying pan tighter. "I am the man your father prays you never meet," he said. "Open the door, girl. I'm not standing in the rain while you decide if I'm a murderer." "My parents aren't home," I said, my voice trembling. "I know," he snapped. "If they were, I wouldn't be here. I don't breathe the same air as Richard if I can help it. Now, open the door before I have my driver kick it down. I have a proposition for you." There was something in his tone, not a threat, but a fact. I undid the chain. He stepped inside, shaking off his umbrella. He looked around the dark, stifling hallway, his nose wrinkling in disgust. "No power, no food in the kitchen, I assume. And they've been in Paris for 3 weeks posting photos of escargot while you starve." I stared at him. "How do you know that?" He turned to me, and the lightning illuminated his face. "I am Arthur Sterling. I am your grandfather." The world tilted. My father had told me his father was dead. He said he was a drunk, a gambler who died in a ditch years ago. "My grandfather is dead," I whispered. Arthur let out a short, harsh laugh. "Richard always did have a flair for fiction. He tells people I'm dead because the truth is too embarrassing for him. I didn't die, Elara. I just cut him off. There is a difference." He walked into the living room, using his cane to push aside a pile of Sophie's fashion magazines. "I've been watching, from a distance. I wanted to see if the rot had spread to all the branches of the tree. Julian is a fool. Sophie is a vanity project. But you..." He turned his steel gaze on me. "You are the only one who didn't get on that plane." "They didn't want me," I said, the shame burning my face. "Good," Arthur said, "because I don't want them. Pack a bag." "What?" "You heard me. Pack a bag. You have 10 minutes. Whatever you can carry. Leave the rest. It's tainted anyway." "I can't just leave," I stammered. "When they come back..." Arthur stepped closer, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that looked like anger in his eyes. Not at me. For me. "When they come back, they will find a house that is exactly as empty as their souls. Do you think they care, Elara? Do you think they are crying into their croissants, wondering if you have eaten? You are a piece of furniture to them, a background character. I am offering you a chance to be the author. Do you want it? Or do you want to stay here and wait for the battery in that flashlight to die?" I looked at the frying pan in my hand. I looked at the dark, silent house that had been my prison. I thought about the padlock on the pantry. 10 minutes, I said. I ran upstairs. I grabbed my backpack. I didn't take clothes. They were all hand-me-downs from Sophie anyway. I took my journals. I took the photo of me and a dog I once had before my father gave it away. I took my singular pair of good boots, and I walked back down. Arthur was waiting by the door. He nodded once. "Let's go." The drive was silent. The inside of the Rolls-Royce smelled of leather and safety. I ate a protein bar the driver, a massive man named Graves, handed me without a word. I fell asleep before we hit the highway. When I woke up, we were entering a gate that looked like the entrance to Jurassic Park. Iron wrought into twisting vines, stone pillars topped with gargoyles. The car swept up a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oaks, and then the house appeared. Sterling Manor wasn't a house, it was a fortress. Gray stone, turrets, windows that glowed with warm, golden light. It sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, the waves crashing against the rocks below. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. "Welcome to the rest of your life," Arthur said as the car stopped. Inside, the house was a museum. Marble floors, tapestries that looked older than my country, silence that felt respectful, not empty. A woman in a sharp black suit was waiting in the foyer. "This is Mrs. Higgins," Arthur said, handing his coat to her. "She runs this house. If you cross her, I cannot save you. Mrs. Higgins, this is Elara. She is staying, indefinitely. Burn her clothes, get her something that doesn't smell like suburbia and failure, and get her a steak, rare." "Yes, sir," Mrs. Higgins said, her face impassive. She looked at me and her eyes softened just a fraction. "Follow me, Miss Elara." That night, I ate a steak that cost more than my father's car payments. I slept in a bed with sheets made of Egyptian cotton. But before I slept, Arthur knocked on my door. He didn't come in. He stood in the doorway, leaning on his cane. "Tomorrow, the work begins," he said. "What work?" I asked, sitting up. "You are a Vance right now," he said, his voice hard, soft, apologetic, invisible. "If you are going to be a Sterling, we have to break you down and build you back up. I don't run a charity, Elara. I am making an investment. Do not disappoint me." "Why?" I asked. "Why me? Why now?" Arthur looked at me for a long time. "Because hate is a powerful fuel, my dear, and you have a full tank. I intend to teach you how to drive the engine." The next month was not a vacation. It was boot camp. Arthur hired tutors, not for math or science, but for things I didn't know could be taught. Rhetoric, body language, strategy, financial literacy. "Stand up straight," he would bark at breakfast. "You are hunching like a beggar. Occupy space. Make the room acknowledge you." In the afternoons, I sat in his library, a room filled with more books than I could read in 10 lifetimes, and he taught me about business. Not just numbers, but the psychology of the deal. "People lie," he told me, pouring himself a brandy. "They lie with their words, but their hands tell the truth. Watch the hands, Elara. Watch the eyes. Your father looks at the ceiling when he lies. Your mother touches her necklace. Everyone has a tell. Find it and you own them." I absorbed it all. I was a sponge. I was starving for this, for competence, for power. I learned to walk without making a sound. I learned to speak with a cadence that commanded attention. I learned that silence was a weapon, not a weakness. August came, the day of my parents' return. Arthur called me into his study. "They are back," he said. "They landed an hour ago. They are driving home." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Do I have to go back?" "No," Arthur smiled, a cold, predatory thing. "We are going to visit them." "Visit?" "You left without saying goodbye. It's only polite to welcome them home." We took the Rolls-Royce. When we pulled up to my childhood home, my father's car was in the driveway. The front door was open. We could hear shouting from inside. "Where is she?" My mother's voice, shrill and panicked. "The house is empty. The food is gone." "Maybe she ran away," Julian's voice, bored. "Check her room." I stepped out of the car. I was wearing a tailored black dress Arthur had bought me, heels that clicked on the pavement, and my hair was cut into a sharp, chic bob. I didn't look like the girl in the oversized t-shirt anymore. I looked like a weapon. Arthur walked beside me, his cane tapping a rhythm on the walkway. We walked right through the open front door. My family was in the kitchen. Suitcases exploded everywhere. My mother was holding the empty jar of peanut butter. My father was on the phone, probably calling the police to save face. "Put the phone down, Richard," Arthur said. His voice wasn't loud, but it silenced the room instantly. My father spun around. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. "Dad?" he whispered. You're supposed to be dead?" Arthur finished. "Yes, well, disappointment keeps me alive." "What are you doing here?" my mother demanded, stepping forward. Then she saw me. She stopped. Her eyes widened. She looked from my shoes to my face, struggling to recognize the daughter she had left behind. "Elara?" "Hello, Mother," I said. My voice was steady, calm, sterling. "Did you enjoy Paris?" "Where have you been?" she shrieked, finding her footing. "We come home to a disaster. No electricity, no food, and you're wearing—" She gestured at my dress. "Where did you get that?" "I bought it for her," Arthur said smoothly, "since you seem to have forgotten that children require clothing and sustenance." "This is none of your business, old man," my father snarled, stepping between us. "She is my daughter. Elara, get upstairs. You are grounded until you are 30. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I looked my father in the eye, and for the first time, I saw him for what he was. Small, weak. A bully who only picked fights he thought he could win. "No," I said. "Excuse me?" He blinked. I said no. I took a step forward. "I am not going upstairs. I am not staying in this house, and I am certainly not your daughter. Not anymore." "You walked out," my mother hissed. "You ungrateful little brat. After everything we've done for you?" "You left me with a locked pantry and a power cut," I said, my voice ice cold. "You didn't do anything for me. You did things to me, and I am done." "I'm taking her," Arthur announced. "I have already filed the paperwork. Emancipation is a tricky legal process, but with my lawyers and your record of abandonment, it was surprisingly easy. You signed the delivery receipt for the summons 3 weeks ago, Richard. Didn't you read it?" "Ah, no. You were in Paris." My father looked like he was going to be sick. "You can't take her. She's a minor." "She is an heir," Arthur corrected, "and she is leaving with me. You have Julian and Sophie. Ruin them however you see fit, but Elara is mine." Sophie spoke up from the corner, looking at me with jealousy burning in her eyes. "Why does she get to go with him? He's rich. That's not fair." I looked at my sister. "Life isn't fair, Sophie, but don't worry. I left you the peanut butter jar. You can scrape the sides." I turned on my heel and walked out. I didn't look back. I heard my father shouting. I heard my mother crying, but it sounded like noise from a television in another room. Distant, irrelevant. I got into the car. Arthur slid in beside me. As we pulled away, he opened a silver flask and handed it to me. "A sip," he said, "to celebrate." I took a tiny sip. It burned, but it warmed me up. "You did well," he said quietly. "But that was the easy part. Defying them is simple. Surpassing them, that takes a lifetime." "I have time," I said, watching my old house disappear in the rearview mirror. "Good," Arthur nodded. "Because we have a company to hostile takeover and I need a successor. School starts on Monday, Elara. And at this school, they don't give grades for participation. They give them for dominance." I leaned back against the leather seat. The girl who counted pennies was gone. The girl who waited for permission was gone. The war had just begun. Living with Arthur Sterling wasn't like living with a grandfather. It was like living with a general in a war room. Sterling Manor didn't have cozy Sunday breakfasts. It had briefings. "Emotions are a liability, Elara," he told me over espresso one morning. I was 17 then. "Love, anger, jealousy, they are chemical defects in the brain that cloud judgment. In business and in life, The person who cares the least holds the most power. Never let them see you bleed. I took that to heart. I didn't just learn it, I became it. While my peers were worrying about prom dates and college applications, I was shadowing Arthur in boardrooms. I sat in the corner, a silent observer in a charcoal blazer, taking notes on how he dismantled grown men with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a pause that lasted 3 seconds too long. I learned that silence makes people nervous. They fill it with chatter, and in that chatter, they reveal their weaknesses. My old family became a distant frequency, like static on a radio I no longer listened to. I knew, vaguely, that Julian had dropped out of college after blowing out his knee, and his scholarship. I knew Sophie was trying to become an influencer, posting filtered photos of a life she couldn't afford. My parents were leveraging their house to keep up appearances. I watched their slow, inevitable decline from a distance, feeling nothing but a clinical curiosity. Like watching a building demolish itself in slow motion. Arthur sent me to a private university in New York. "Don't study art," he warned. "Study leverage." So I did. I majored in finance and corporate law. I didn't make friends. I made alliances. I walked the campus like I owned the pavement, my head high, my eyes scanning for threats and opportunities. I didn't date. Men my age were boys, and after being raised by Arthur Sterling, boys were intolerably boring. By 22, I was working at Sterling Enterprises officially, not as the heiress, but as an analyst. Arthur insisted I start at the bottom. "Inheritance is a gift," he said. "Respect is earned. If you don't know how the engine works, you can't drive the car." I worked 80-hour weeks. I ate lunch at my desk. I found mistakes in ledgers that senior accountants missed. I ruthlessly renegotiated contracts that saved the company millions. And every Friday night, I sat with Arthur in his study, drinking scotch that was older than me, dissecting the week. "You were too soft on the Henderson deal," he criticized one night, staring into the fire. "I got the price we wanted," I countered. "You left them with their dignity," he shot back. "Never leave an enemy with dignity, Elara. They'll use it to rebuild and come back for you. Crush them completely, or don't fight at all." He was brutal, he was cold, and he was the only person on earth who truly saw me. But time is the one thing money cannot bribe. It started subtly, a tremor in his hand when he signed documents, a moment of confusion where he called me Catherine, my mother's name, before correcting himself with a scowl. He refused to see a doctor. He hated weakness. But the collapse, when it came, was undeniable. I found him in the library, slumped over his desk, a glass of water spilled across a merger agreement. The next 3 months were a blur of hospitals, specialists, and the sterile smell of antiseptic. The great Arthur Sterling, the titan of industry, was reduced to a hospital bed. But even dying, he was terrifying. He barked orders at nurses, critiqued the doctor's tie, and refused to take pain medication because it dulled the edge. I moved my office into his hospital room. I ran the company from his bedside during the day and read to him at night. One rainy Tuesday, the machines were beeping a slow, rhythmic cadence. He motioned for me to come closer. His voice was a rasp, a shadow of the thunder it used to be. "Elara." "I'm here," I said, holding his hand. It felt frail, like dry paper. "The vultures," he whispered. "They are circling. You know that, right?" "I know. Your parents, your siblings, they smell blood in the water. They think because I haven't spoken to them in years that death will make me sentimental. They think they are entitled to the kingdom." "Let them think it," I said, my voice tight. Arthur squeezed my hand, a sudden burst of strength. "Listen to me. I have rewritten the will. It is unconventional. It will cause a war. I need to know you are ready for it." "I am ready," I promised. He looked at me, his gray eyes cloudy but still sharp. "You are not the girl who stood on the porch anymore. You are the storm that came after. Don't show them mercy, Elara. Show them consequences." He died an hour later. He didn't have any famous last words. He just closed his eyes, let out a long sigh, and stopped fighting. I didn't cry. Not in the room. Not when the doctors came in. Not when I signed the death certificate. Sterling women don't cry. I went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, reapplied my red lipstick, his favorite shade, and walked out to face the press. The funeral was a circus. It was held at the largest cathedral in the city. The pews were packed with business rivals, politicians, and people who claimed to be Arthur's dear friends, despite never visiting him once. And then they arrived. My parents walked in like they were the guests of honor. My mother was wearing a black dress that was a little too short, a little too tight, and a hat with a veil that looked like a costume prop. My father was shaking hands with everyone, introducing himself as Arthur's only son, soaking up the condolences like a sponge. Julian limped behind them, looking bloated and tired, wearing a suit that didn't fit. Sophie was there, actually live-streaming her walk up the church steps, whispering to her phone about the tragedy of losing her beloved grandpa. I stood at the front, near the casket. I was wearing a black trench coat, sharp and structured. I watched them approach. When they saw me, they paused. It had been 7 years since the day I left, 7 years since I was the skinny girl with the bad haircut. Now, I was the CEO in waiting, standing tall, my face a mask of stone. "Elara," my mother breathed, pulling down her veil to reveal dry eyes. She reached out to hug me. I took a half step back. She hugged the air. "Mother," I said, no warmth, no malice, just a fact. "Oh, honey," she gushed, recovering quickly. "Look at you. You look expensive. We've missed you so much. We tried to call, but your grandfather, he was a difficult man. He kept us apart." "He didn't keep us apart," I said calmly. "You didn't have my number." "We're here now," my father interrupted, stepping in with his chest puffed out. "Family needs to stick together in times like this. It's going to be a lot to handle, the estate, the company. You're young, Elara. You'll need guidance. I'm ready to step up and take the burden off your shoulders." The audacity was breathtaking. He wasn't mourning his father. He was measuring the drapery for his new office. "We can discuss logistics later," I said, turning away. "Today is for Arthur." The service was long. People gave speeches about a man they didn't know. I sat in the front row, my back straight, feeling the eyes of my family burning into the back of my neck. They weren't looking at me with love. They were calculating my net worth. The real show, however, was the reading of the will. It was scheduled for the next morning at the law firm of Halloway and Finch. The conference room was massive, with a mahogany table that reflected the faces of the greedy. My parents sat on one side, flanked by Julian and Sophie. They looked like they had already spent the money in their heads. My mother was flipping through a brochure for a yacht. Julian was checking the price of sports cars on his phone. I sat alone on the other side. Just me. Mr. Finch, Arthur's lawyer for 40 years, walked in. He was a man who looked like a tortoise, slow, deliberate, and ancient. He carried a thick leather binder. "Good morning," Finch said, sitting at the head of the table. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Arthur James Sterling." "Let's get on with it," my father said, leaning forward, rubbing his palms together. "It's been a stressful week. We need closure." Finch peered over his glasses at my father. "Closure, yes." He opened the binder. "Arthur was very specific," Finch began. "He updated his will 3 days before he passed." My mother squeezed my father's hand. This was it, the jackpot. "First," Finch read, "to the charities listed in Addendum A, including the Hospital for Sick Children and the Veterans Fund, I leave the sum of $50 million. My father flinched, but nodded. "Tax write-offs. Smart. Good man." "To my household staff," Finch continued, "Mrs. Higgins and Mr. Graves, I leave $5 million each, ensuring their retirement is comfortable." "$5 million for the maid?" Sophie whispered loudly. "Is he insane?" "To my grandchildren, Julian and Sophie Vance," Finch read. Julian sat up straight. Sophie stopped chewing her gum. "I leave the sum of—" Finch paused, squinting at the paper. $1 each." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. "Excuse me?" Julian asked, his voice cracking. "Did you say $1 million?" $1, Finch repeated. Arthur added a note, "Use it to buy a clue." Sophie made a noise like a strangled cat, and to my son Richard and his wife Catherine, Finch continued, his voice monotone. My parents were pale, translucent. I leave the family home in the suburbs, the mortgage for which I secretly bought from the bank 5 years ago. I forgive the debt. You may keep your house. However, I leave you no cash assets. You have lived beyond your means for decades waiting for me to die. I trust the house will provide shelter while you look for employment. "This is illegal!" my father shouted, slamming his hand on the table. He stood up, his face purple. "He can't do this. I am his son. I will contest this. He was senile. He was manipulated." He spun around and pointed a shaking finger at me. You did this. You poisoned him against us." I didn't move. I didn't blink. "Sit down, Richard," Finch said calmly. "I haven't finished." "There's more?" my mother whimpered. "There is the matter of Sterling Enterprises, the investment portfolio, the properties in London, Tokyo, and New York, and the remainder of the liquid assets, totaling approximately $4.2 billion. The room seemed to shrink. 4.2 billion. "To my granddaughter, Elara Vance," Finch read, looking directly at me with a small, secret smile. "I leave everything." My father looked like he had been shot. "Everything?" "The company, the money, the power. It is all hers," Finch said. "Sole beneficiary, sole executrix." I stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor, the sound loud in the quiet room. I smoothed my skirt. I looked at my family, these people who had locked me in a house with no food, who had forgotten my birthday, who had treated me like a burden. "You said you wanted to take the burden off my shoulders, Dad," I said softly. My father was trembling. "Elara, honey, listen, we're family. You can't just... You don't know how to manage that kind of money. We can help you. We can be a team." "A team," I repeated. "Like when you went to Paris?" I picked up the file Mr. Finch slid toward me. I tucked it under my arm. "You have your house," I said. "You have your dollar. I suggest you leave before I call security. This building belongs to me now, and I don't like trespassers." "You ungrateful bitch!" Julian lunged across the table. Mr. Graves, my driver and bodyguard, stepped out of the shadows by the door. He didn't say a word. He just cracked his knuckles. Julian froze, sinking back into his chair. "This isn't over!" my mother screamed, tears finally flowing, real tears of financial terror. "We will sue you! We will take you to court for every cent!" I walked to the door and paused, hand on the handle. I looked back at them one last time. "I know you will try," I said, "and that is exactly what Arthur wanted. He didn't just leave me his money, Mother. He left me his lawyers, and he taught me how to win." I opened the door and walked out. I walked down the long hallway, the click-clack of my heels echoing like gunshots. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, cutting off the sound of my family screaming at the lawyer, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. I looked tired. I looked sad. But mostly, I looked like him. Arthur was gone. The training wheels were off. The war had officially begun. And as the elevator plummeted toward the ground floor, I knew one thing for certain. They were going to regret ever teaching me how to be alone. They say the higher you climb, the thinner the air gets. They don't tell you that the air is also full of sharks. 6 months after Arthur's death, I wasn't just running Sterling Enterprises. I was defending it from a siege. My family didn't just sue me. They launched a media crusade. They went on talk shows, weeping about how I had manipulated a dying old man, how I was mentally unstable, how I had stolen their birthright. My mother cried on Good Morning America. My father gave exclusive interviews to tabloids, painting himself as the grieving son cut out by a vindictive daughter. They were playing the victim card so hard, I was surprised they didn't get paper cuts. I sat in my office on the 50th floor, watching my brother Julian give a press conference outside the courthouse. He was wearing a neck brace. He didn't have a neck injury. "She's heartless," Julian told the cameras, pointing at the Sterling Tower behind him. "We just want what's fair. We want justice for our grandfather." I turned off the TV. "They are polling well with the suburban demographic," said a voice from the doorway. I turned to see Marcus Thorne. He was my chief legal counsel, young, brilliant, and the only person in the building who wasn't terrified of me. Arthur had hired him straight out of Harvard, and he was the one person I had decided to trust, tentatively. "Let them poll well," I said, walking to the window. "Public opinion doesn't decide probate law, facts do." "True," Marcus said, placing a file on my desk. "But they aren't just fighting in court, Elara. They're getting desperate. I found this." I opened the file. It was a forensic accounting report. "Your father," Marcus explained, "has been meeting with our competitors, specifically with Vortex Holdings. He's trying to sell them inside information about our upcoming tech merger in exchange for a payout. He's trying to sabotage the company's stock price, so the board will vote to remove you." I stared at the documents. My father wasn't just greedy. He was willing to burn down his father's legacy just to warm his own hands. "He's leaking trade secrets," I whispered. "That's corporate espionage. That's a felony." "It is," Marcus nodded. "We have him on tape. We can bury him, Elara. We can send him to prison." I looked out at the city. I thought about the 13-year-old girl waiting on the porch. I thought about the padlock on the pantry. I thought about Arthur, who died fearing his legacy would be eaten by vultures. Sending him to prison would be justice, but Arthur taught me that justice is boring. Consequences are better. "No," I said, closing the file. "Prison is too easy. He'll play the martyr. I want to destroy him completely. I want him to do it to himself." "What's the plan?" Marcus asked, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "The merger," I said. "Let him think he has the real data, but we're going to feed him a poison pill, give him false information, let him sell it to Vortex. When Vortex realizes they bought fake data, they will sue him for fraud. He will lose the house Arthur let him keep. He will lose his reputation. He will lose everything." Marcus looked at me with something that looked like admiration. "That is incredibly cold. Arthur would be proud." "Execute it," I said. The trap was set. 2 weeks later, the day of the final court hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed. My family sat on the plaintiff's bench looking smug. They thought they had won. They thought the negative press and the stock dip had weakened me. My father was wearing a new suit. He smiled at me as I walked in, a predatory, oily smile. "Ready to give up, sweetheart?" he whispered as I passed. "We can settle right now. Half. That's all we want." I didn't look at him. I sat down next to Marcus. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Holloway, called the court to order. "We are here to issue a final ruling on the estate of Arthur Sterling," she began. "However, the defense has submitted new evidence this morning. Evidence of criminal misconduct by the plaintiff." My father's smile faltered. "What?" Marcus stood up. "Your Honor, over the last 2 weeks, Mr. Richard Vance has attempted to sell proprietary company secrets to a competitor in an effort to devalue the estate he is claiming to fight for. We have emails, recordings, and bank transfers." "That's a lie!" my father screamed, jumping up. "This is a setup!" "The information he sold," Marcus continued calmly, "was fabricated by us as a sting operation. Mr. Vance accepted a down payment of $200,000 from Vortex Holdings. That money is currently in an offshore account he opened last week." The courtroom erupted. My mother looked at my father, horror dawning on her face. "Richard? You said it was a consulting fee." My father stammered, looking around wildly. I was trying to save the company." "By selling it?" Judge Holloway asked, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Mr. Vance, this is perjury. This is fraud. I am dismissing your claim to the estate with prejudice. Furthermore, I am referring this evidence to the district attorney." The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. My family collapsed. Not literally, but I watched their spirits break. My mother started sobbing, realizing the money was gone forever. Sophie looked at her phone, realizing her rich heiress brand was dead. Julian just put his head in his hands. And my father? He looked at me. For the first time, he didn't see a child or a mistake. He saw the monster he had created. I walked over to them. The bailiffs were moving in, but they stepped back to let me pass. "Elara," my father rasped. Please, I'm your father." I looked down at him. "You ceased to be my father the day you left me in the dark. You are just a man who made a bad investment." I turned to my mother. She reached out a hand. "Elara, we have nowhere to go. If Vortex sues us, we lose the house. We'll be on the street." I reached into my purse. I pulled out a single silver key, the key to the pantry in my old house. I had kept it all these years as a reminder. I dropped the key into her palm. "There's plenty of food in the freezer," I said. "Ration it." I turned and walked out of the courtroom. The cameras flashed, the reporters shouted my name, but I didn't stop. I walked out into the sunlight. I won. But victory, I realized, felt strangely quiet. The war was over. The enemy was defeated. Arthur was avenged. But as I sat in the back of the car, driving away from the courthouse, I felt a sudden, crushing exhaustion. I had spent my entire life reacting, surviving, proving them wrong. Who was I, now that I didn't have to fight anymore? "Where to, Miss Vance?" Graves asked from the front seat. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Take us to the pier," Marcus said gently, sitting beside me. I looked at him. "The pier?" "You need air, real air, not the recycled stuff in the office." We walked along the wooden planks of the Santa Monica Pier. The ocean was vast and indifferent. It didn't care about money or legacy. It just was. "You know," Marcus said, leaning against the railing, "Arthur was a great man, but he was a lonely man. He thought love was a weakness. He died in a room full of machines, holding the hand of an employee." I stiffened. "I was his granddaughter." "You were his soldier," Marcus corrected softly. "He loved you, in his own way, but he trained you to be alone. You don't have to be him, Elara." I looked at the water. "I don't know how to be anything else. Softness gets you killed." "Softness gets you hurt," Marcus said, "but it also lets you live. You've won the war. You can put down the sword now." He reached out and took my hand. His hand was warm. It didn't feel like a transaction. It felt like an anchor. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "Not for the company, not for Arthur, for you." I thought about it, really thought about it. I had billions of dollars. I could go anywhere. I could do anything. "I want a burger," I said. "A greasy, cheap diner burger and a milkshake." Marcus laughed, a real bright sound. "Done." We sat in a booth at a roadside diner. The vinyl was cracked. The table was sticky. It was perfect. I ate the burger, and for the first time in years, I tasted the food. I wasn't plotting. I wasn't strategizing. I was just eating. My phone buzzed, a notification. Vortex Holdings files lawsuit against Richard Vance for fraud. I swiped the notification away. I turned the phone over. "You okay?" Marcus asked. I looked at him. I looked at the sunlight streaming through the dusty window. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old journal I had taken from my house that night 7 years ago. The pages were filled with anger, with plans for revenge, with pain. I closed the book. "I'm okay," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. I wasn't the forgotten child anymore. I wasn't the victim. I wasn't even the avenger. I was Elara Vance, and the page in front of me was finally beautifully blank. "So," I said, taking a sip of my milkshake, "tell me about this new tech merger. I have some ideas." Marcus smiled, and we started to talk. Not about war, but about building something new. The past was a closed chapter, the ink was dry, and the future? I picked up a pen.